The world is getting warmer. It's gotten about 1 degree centigrade warmer since pre-industrial times. Most of that is due to human influence, including carbon emissions, but a broader set of greenhouse gases, as well as land use change. We are seeing forest fires around the world. We saw them at greater frequency in California, Australia, but also in the Amazon. Many remember in 2019, President Macron raised awareness with this photograph on Twitter where he said that the Amazon is the lungs of the world and that it produces 20% of our oxygen. Cristiano Ronaldo, Madonna, Leonardo DiCaprio all tweeted this photo of the Amazon on fire. There was great concern raised about the Yanomami Indians of Brazil. Many know that sea level is rising, has been rising due to melting polar ice and resulting in higher sea levels. This National Geographic raised awareness of a starving polar bear. It went viral. It was a big story. They said it was because of climate change. The number of wild animals in the world has declined by about half since 1970. And it's occurred mostly in the tropics of Latin America, Southeast Asia. It's also happening in Africa. And what's driving the decline of wild animals is the loss of habitat, but also just the direct consumption of wild animals. Humans use about half of the surface of the ice-free Earth, half of the ice-free surface of the Earth. Half of that half is for meat production. So humans use a full 1/4 of the Earth for meat production. That's an amount that grew an area the size of Alaska between 1926 and 2016. We're eating too much fish from 1/3 of all fish stocks. And that has tripled since the 70s and is now set to double the amount of fish that we consume. Just imagine the population rises as Chinese and others get wealthy. We want to eat more fish, and that's having a huge impact on fish stocks. Only 15% of the Earth land surface is protected. 8% of the oceans are. Many people have seen the photographs of the impact of plastic waste, both in the bodies of sea animals and sea birds, as well as caught, trapped, like plastic straw was up the nose of a sea turtle in Costa Rica in a video that went viral a few years ago. And that species is now critically endangered. And I think we've seen one of the most important ecological events is the pandemic. It appears, unless it turns out that if it turns out the virus was made in a lab, that would change things. But if the conventional explanation is correct, then the coronavirus most likely came from a bat and may have been transmitted through a pangolin. And then it could have been transmitted to humans either at the farm or at a live wet market in South China or in China. And the forest frontier and agriculture, we now know is dangerous because it can result in pandemics. We need greater separation from nature and farming. We know that children are very afraid of climate change. 1 out of 5 children are having nightmares of climate change. In Britain, I expect it's very similar in Spain. 1 out of 2 people in the world surveyed, half of all people, think climate change could make humans extinct, according to a very large global survey. The good news we hear from almost everybody is that we can power the world on solar panels and wind turbines. The head of the United Nations Forestry Department for the Food and Agriculture Organization says we can use wood as an alternative. We understand that energy efficiency will reduce our energy consumption. Going vegetarian will result in less carbon emissions. And we don't need nuclear power. Most people agree we don't need nuclear power. Look at what happened in Japan 10 years ago this week. Well, I'm here to say that while everything I just said is correct, That's not the whole picture. There's more to the story. For example, the United States is now the world climate leader. I don't think anybody knows this. Very few people know it. Just 10 years ago, the United States was considered a climate villain, or 15 years ago. In fact, the U.S. has reduced its carbon emissions from energy more than any other country. In fact, energy is the main source of carbon emissions. And certainly I'm going to argue, one of the only ones we can control. And the United States is now doing better than its Copenhagen and Paris agreements. So the United States is actually outperforming most of Europe, Australia, and other countries that used to criticize the United States for not taking climate change seriously. We may be at peak global emissions. If that's true, this is remarkable and not anticipated by experts or anybody else. My own view, if I have to take a bet, is that emissions will increase for another 10 years or so, but that they will certainly have peaked by mid-century. And that means that global temperatures are unlikely to go above 3 degrees and very well may be below 2.5 or 2 degrees. Everyone wants to ban plastic straws, but they constitute 0.03% of plastic waste. It's not a big contributor to the problem. And the big problem is that plastic waste is going into the oceans traditionally from Asia. That's now changing, and it turns out that much of the waste does come from rich countries, but it goes to poor countries first, and it's because there's the myth of recycling. We don't recycle 90% of plastic waste, and so I'm going to argue that we should not try. That the plastic is not meant to be recycled. It should be either incinerated or put at landfills. In terms of vegetarianism, if you go vegetarian, you'll reduce your carbon emissions by 2 to 4%. And the reason is that the money you save by not buying meat is money you spend using energy that can produce carbon emissions, such as flying on jet planes. The photograph of the Amazon on fire was not of the fire of the Amazon in 2019. It was of the Amazon in 1999. And in fact, fires globally have declined by a quarter since 2003, a huge decline in fires globally. Amazon fires were only 7% higher than they were over the last 10 years. You can see the fires track burned deforestation area, which is still lower than it was 15 years ago. The good news, only 20% of the Amazon has been deforested. Half is already protected. As for the Yanomami, they control an area larger, the largest area of indigenous control in the world. In fact, it's an area the size of Hungary, but whereas Hungary has 10 million people, there's less than 20,000 Yanomami. So the Yanomami are fine. They actually did very well thanks to indigenous rights advocates and the Brazilian government. The biggest cause of death for the black-browned albatross, which is what this species is fishing boats and invasive predators, not plastic waste. And we're not in the 6th mass extinction. We're losing species, but it's not a mass extinction. You can see this is the number of plant, animal, and insect species that have gone extinct since 1500. 3/4 of all species are not threatened. Only 6% are critically endangered. To be a mass extinction, you need to have over half or more like 75 to 90% at risk. We don't know how many polar bears there are. That's the whole story. Like, the truth is we just haven't counted many of them. So we don't know if the number of polar bears are going up or down. And here's another important fact. We hunted more polar bears than exist. So if we want to save polar bears, then we should not hunt them. That's the main threat to polar bears. It's not from ice melting. In fact, the photograph of the starving polar bear, we don't know why the polar bear was starving. It might have had nothing to do with food. He might have been sick. National Geographic apologized for this, and then they blamed the photographer, who also apologized. Humpback whales are coming back. We've had huge impacts, but we've also had huge conservation successes. Humpbacks are coming back. We kill 97% fewer whales. Sea turtles are coming back. We've actually had success. It's not solved, but we've made incredible success. And it's a mistake to suggest we haven't. As for plastics, they actually help to save sea turtles. Why is that? Well, it's because the plastic, I'm not wearing my these are my other glasses. The plastic, this is plastic from fossil fuels, but they used to use sea turtle shells to make glasses. And so we've saved sea turtles by replacing natural bioplastics with plastics made from fossil fuels. So that saves sea turtles. Now, I think it's fair to ask, who am I and why am I saying this? So just to establish who I am fortunate to be independent of any financial interests. I'm an independent researcher and journalist. We have a very small organization, but we do strong research, and we're not afraid to say things that are unorthodox on any direction. Here's our website. All the slides I'm showing you can find on my website. Everything here is on the website. This was my book in the United States. And I got started by going to Nicaragua in 1990. I was a young socialist. I always cared about people and the environment. My life has been dedicated to two things: lifting people out of poverty and protecting the environment. Those are the two things I've always worked for. I lived in Brazil in the semi-Amazon, and it's very romantic. There's something beautiful about these lives, but these are very poor. There's a lot of poverty, and I was struck by how hard life is. Kids that should be in school, getting water, collecting wood. It's a difficult life. Still a lot of poverty in Latin America. It's done really well over the last 30 years, but it's also still a lot of poverty. But you can see the achievements have been amazing. We have reduced poverty from 44% to 10% since 1980. Infant mortality has declined to very low levels, to 4%. It's a huge achievement. We live so much longer, and this is mostly a consequence of infant mortality. Life expectancy is 70, 80 years old now. It's incredible. And the number of kids that we have goes down. So my mother was one of 5 children. I am one of 2 children. And so we just have fewer kids because we don't need as many kids if we don't live on the farm. We produce so much food. We have too much food. We waste food. There's just no risk. There's no starvation. If people are hungry, it's because of poverty, not because we don't have enough food. In terms of energy efficiency, we can become a little bit more energy efficient, but the relationship between energy and GDP and wealth is constant and remains tightly connected. You can see Germany can reduce its energy consumption a little bit, but it doesn't become India or China. It doesn't go to Vietnam levels. It stays at very high levels of energy consumption. What about all the disasters? We're doing great. Humans have reduced the deaths from natural disasters by over 90% over the last 100 years. Disasters are not costing any more when you normalize the data. In other words, when you account for growing wealth, disasters aren't causing more damage. So when a hurricane hits Miami today in 2017, there's a lot more damage, but that's because there's a lot more buildings. In 1925, there wasn't very much to damage. Sea level rise, it's the thing I'm least worried about. I've never been worried about sea level rise. It's going very slow, and we're very good at adapting to sea level rise. I mean, just look at the Netherlands. The Netherlands farms in some places 7 meters below sea level. Well, sea levels are supposed to rise a half meter, 0.6 meters between now and 2100. I mean, of course we can adapt to that. Nobody actually thinks, there's not really even an argument that we can't. I interviewed the lead author of the IPCC on sea level rise, and there's no evidence that we can't, and a lot of evidence that we can. What about risk of catastrophe, of a black swan, fat tail, low probability, high consequence event? Václav Smil, who is Bill Gates's main energy advisor, maybe the most influential energy and catastrophe thinker in the world, Václav Smil of Canada, wrote a whole book comparing potential catastrophes. And he concluded that wars, disease, volcanoes, tsunamis, and asteroids have a greater black swan risk. Really looking both at fatalities and probabilities than climate change, which actually is that line going down off the map. You can't see it. I think we're all reminded from coronavirus that disease remains one of the greatest threats, not just to life, but to civilization. What about the fires? The fires in California and Australia are overwhelmingly being caused by too much wood fuel in the forests. And the reason we know that is because when a high-intensity fire comes into a well-managed forest, the fire drops from the tops of the tree crowns to the floor and becomes a good fire. Fire is good at these low levels, this kind of low level here. That's the fire you want in good, well-managed forests. You don't want these big fires, but if the fires are well-managed, it drops. So it's a matter of forest management. Europe is very hypocritical about the Amazon. This is what Europe did to its forests. Okay, between 900 and 1900. Europe, you cleared your forests because you were trying to grow and become modern, which occurred. And then the forest grew back. Since 1900, the forest of Europe has returned to an area roughly the size of Portugal. So today, 40% of Europe is tree covered. Why? Because you don't need as much land to grow food. That's the main reason. Plus, you don't use trees for wood fuel anymore. You let the trees be trees. This is what you get with prosperity. So you can see a close-up, a beautiful graphic, close-up of France, Spain, Portugal, and Italy. Look at how much greener it got from increased reforestation, from growing more food on less land. So the older farmlands went back to forests. Plastic waste. It's a problem, again, of poverty, and also us sending our plastic waste to places that can't recycle. We should stop doing that. We even have good news on meat production. This is maybe the most important environmental trend in the world. Why? Because for me, the use of land is the most important environmental issue. It always has been. It had never changed. And the amount of land we use for meat production declined an area almost the size of Alaska. You can see the peak of land for meat production declining. It's so inspiring because that means that there will be more land for wild animals. So if you care about nature, you want this. So you see a lot more greening, and it's happening in the temperate regions. Not yet in the tropics, but it can and should and will. So the good news is that we are producing more farmed fish. And we can do more of this and reduce the pressure on wild fish and leave more wild fish in the oceans for whales and other sea life. We are 15% may not sound like much, but that's very good. That's an area the size of Alaska. That is true progress, and we should build on that progress. Look at how many more areas are protected. 25 times more areas since 1962 are protected. So we have lost beautiful places. It's true. We've lost beautiful places. But we've also protected beautiful places. We should celebrate. It's only half the story. We should celebrate the places that we've saved. We've seen increases in biodiversity. That's not the metric. The right metric is total wild animals. Let's take a closer look now at how humans save nature, because we don't talk enough about this. We don't understand this. How do we save nature? Let's start with the whales. We used to harvest whales in the United States for energy, for lights, whale oil as lights. And then in Europe, harvested whales in the 20th century for margarine and soap. What happens in the United States, you can see very clearly. This is the rise and fall of whale oil. Something happens where we stop using whale oil. What is it? Well, you can see in this cartoon from Vanity Fair magazine, the caption reads, "Grand ball given by the whales in honor of the discovery of the oil wells in Pennsylvania." 1861, they knew that petroleum would save the whales. And it did. That's what happened. That's the peak that's when petroleum was discovered. Productive wells produced in one day all the oil you would need in whaling in 3 to 4 years. So it's efficiency, productivity of energy, abundance that saves nature. We need abundant energy to save nature. That's the lesson. Europe and Britain needed coal to stop using wood fuel. Same story, substitution. And we've made a huge amount of progress even on coal, but you can see on all of the major pollutants. This is just the United States, but it's the exact same story in Europe. 83% decline in carbon monoxide, 61% decline in nitrous oxide, 91% decline in sulfur dioxide, and huge declines in lead. Very major success in reductions in air pollution. We've reduced the amount of land that we use for agriculture so significantly that the total land we use for agriculture increased by just 8%, even as food production increased 300%. So you can see that we're just producing much more beef and cow from the same amount of land. So increases in productivity. The size of the chickens got bigger, and that means that we don't need as many chickens or as much land. We actually reduced greenhouse gases from livestock production, even as meat production went up 50%. That's true in the United States, but it's the same in Europe. Plastic bags are really a waste. Paper bags are mostly a waste. Plastic bags are much lighter. They're easier to dispose of, and they use less energy. But the big phenomenon is dematerialization. So just think of your smartphone. You used to have a separate fax machine, stereos, speakers, DVD players, CD players, cameras, calculators, newspapers. We used to destroy forests when now we can use our phones. That's a process that is in every aspect of the economy, dematerialization. Part of it is we just moved to cities, which take up a very small amount of the earth, and yet it's population to half of all humans. You can see we just become more population dense over time. And so we still have endangered species. This is one of my favorites. This is the yellow-eyed penguin of Australia, of New Zealand. It's an endangered species. It just needs more land. It just needs more habitat. So people see this and they see something beautiful. It is beautiful, but it's a lot of land for ranching. So if we want more room for my penguins, for our penguins, we have to concentrate agriculture. Now, the good news is sub-Saharan African farmers can increase their yields by 100% just with irrigation, fertilizer, and machinery. That's all. There's no magic involved, just basic technologies. If every nation did this, global food yields would increase dramatically. Yields would rise 50% if nations increase the number of crops per year. And we could see that with increased productivity, you then can have reforestation and you have less pressure on forests, whether in the Amazon or in South China or in Africa, the places we want to take pressure off of the forests. And it looks like we're at peak wood. This is a huge success. We don't want to use wood as energy. We want to leave more wood in the forests. We want to use less land for agriculture, and that appears to be reaching our peak as well. So consider peak carbon emissions, peak land use, peak wood fuel use. These are the biggest trends. So we should celebrate and build upon that. It's not like there's nothing to do, but we're going in the right direction, clearly. We're even using fertilizer more efficiently. Netherlands has doubled yields using the same amount of fertilizer. So we get less runoff as well, less pollution. The soils that people worried about that are degraded, they're in poor countries because they don't have modern agriculture, modern fertilizers. That's where the crisis is. The United States, soil erosion declined by almost half, even as yields rose. And we know that a lot of the environmental solutions that are proposed are the wrong solutions. Most people are not vegetarian, they're not going to be vegetarian. And that's fine. We can adjust to that. 80% of people who try vegetarianism quit within the first year, or quit over time, then half in the first year. It's fine here's the shorthand: recycle glass, recycle aluminum. Don't recycle plastics because it's not worth it. We can put it in incinerators and they're clean now. They don't produce dioxin, or in landfills. It's fine. We try to recycle plastics. 90% of it goes to poor countries and often in the oceans. So it was a huge mistake. Pasture beef is just much less efficient. We might romantically like it, but concentrated agriculture is how you save land. It's also how you reduce carbon emissions. And then I want to draw attention to the real concerns I have with my fellow environmentalists. Sometimes they oppose good technologies. There's opposition to genetically modified salmon. That weirds people out, but it shouldn't, because it's just a breeding technique. And if you can bring fish production, so this is salmon, what you see here, but the holy grail is tuna. We want tuna. That's what everybody wants. So if you get tuna, including the other animals in the oceans, so if you get tuna farmed on land, then we can eat fish and be healthier, and we can save these wild animals. But the opponents of this tend to be environmentalists because they just don't like the idea of this. But this is okay. This is good for nature. It actually produces less carbon. Significantly less carbon. Natural gas is mostly good when it's replacing coal. It is replacing coal. That's why U.S. emissions have declined. Coal mining is terrible for landscapes. It's gas comes from underground, a tiny footprint above land. Coal to gas, everybody knows this is better. You can see it's a big part of what's reducing emissions in the United States. So we see there's actually been this trend of reducing carbon intensity of energy for 150 years. It's continuing. In the book, Apocalypse Never, I talk about 3 women. Bernadette in the Congo in Africa, Suparti, a factory worker in Indonesia, and Helen, my wife, in the United States. To be prosperous, you have to use energy. So what we want is for the energy to be clean. What we don't want is to be poor. Okay, Bernadette wants to be like Suparti. Suparti wants to be like Helen. That's what everybody wants, the same thing. And the quality of energy matters so that you can see Bernadette uses mostly dirtier energy in the form of wood. Suparti uses cleaner energy and some wood fuel. And Helen's energy is the cleanest of all. I'm going to skip these slides because we're running out of time. Where does all of our clean energy come from? Sweden, France, Switzerland. It's mostly nuclear and hydroelectric dams. And it's the same thing in Illinois. It's the same thing in Belgium. We spend about $2 trillion on nuclear, $2.3 trillion on wind to get and solar to get about half the amount of electricity. Same amount of money, half of the electricity from renewables is from nuclear. Just look at France and Germany. France is heavily nuclear. Germany is moving away from nuclear towards renewables. France produces twice as much of its power from zero carbon sources. Germany saw its electricity prices rise 50%. German electricity is almost twice as expensive as French electricity. And this is the craziest thing. Germany produces 10 times more carbon per unit of electricity as France. So what else? This is all you need to know about energy, economics, and carbon intensity. 2 big countries side by side, very similar, totally different energy and economics. Batteries, for a variety of reasons, are just too expensive. Nobody thinks batteries are going to save solar and wind. You can see that in places like California, our electricity prices went 7 times higher than the rest of the United States because of the use of solar and wind. If Germany had spent what it spent on solar and wind on nuclear, it would already be 100% zero emissions electricity. Everybody worries about nuclear waste. Okay. This is all of the nuclear waste in Switzerland. This is what you should want as somebody that cares about the environment. You want your waste not in the environment. You want it safe and sound, as opposed to spread out in the oceans or in landscapes. You want it concentrated. So why do we get this so wrong? Part of it is that we think that natural things are better. But this doesn't make any sense, because why is a solar panel more natural than a nuclear plant? It doesn't make any, it's not. Plus, what you really want is this direction towards concentration, intensification, because that protects natural environments. What people mean when they say natural is they mean older. They mean bioplastics. But the newer plastics are what saved the ivory tusks in the elephants. We used to use ivory, now we use plastic. Same thing with the sea turtles. We discussed we need concentrated agriculture. It's very important. Solar panel waste, there's 300 times more solar panel waste than nuclear waste. Yes, it's all hazardous because it has lead and other heavy metals inside of it. I will skip ahead because we're running out of time, but you can see solar farms require 400 times more land everywhere in the world. It doesn't matter. California, Spain, huge amounts of land is required for solar panels and wind farms. So if you care about protecting endangered species like the sea tortoise, you don't want to take all of its land. That's what this is about. They had to pull the tortoises out of their burrows, an endangered tortoise, to build this farm. And many died. We see that in Germany, there's protests against wind farms now, against transmission lines because of the environmental impact. This condemnation of economic growth by the richest people in the world, there's something not right about that. It's been a Malthusian idea since the 70s, the 80s. It's the wealthy saying to poor people, you can't have prosperity. It's a very old idea that goes back to the economist Thomas Malthus. The fact of the matter is that global population increases peaked in the late 60s, and they've been going down. Human population will likely peak at 9, maybe 10 billion. Unfortunately, fear is very powerful, and so this statement in particular motivated me to write my book. Greta Thunberg said, I don't want you to hope, which itself is a remarkable statement. She said, I want you to panic, but we should not want anybody to panic. I don't want my worst enemies to panic. Why? Because panic means unthinking behaviors and actions. Unthinking. Why would we want unthinking? That's dangerous. So the good news is that nuclear is the safest way to make electricity. If we cared about climate change, that's what we would be doing. Other energy sources are much more dangerous, including wind turbines. We know that 7 million people die annually of air pollution. Nuclear power has actually saved almost 2 million lives just by preventing air pollution. So there's, money to be made in alarmism. The United Nations has been predicting, the end of the world since the 1980s. Macron was defending French farmers. The French farmers were criticizing Macron for allowing Brazilian food in. So there was this ulterior agenda here. You can see here after the Amazon, they said, well, we got to rethink this whole Mercosur deal. So what matters? I'll end here. I know I've taken so much time. development so we can collect waste rather than let it go into the environment. We have to go from matter-dense fuels to energy-dense fuels. This is the right direction, from renewables, wood, solar, wind, all the way to uranium. This is the positive, nature-saving direction and prosperity direction. We should do more agricultural collaboration, intensification. We should help each other because that's how you save rainforests. I'm just going to skip through these. If we care about treating farm animals better, because we should care about that. Temple Grandin specializes in helping animals live better lives on farms. She's done incredible work. And we need to move away from this romantic idea of natural products. You can see that in order to, or my glasses, we need these plastics to save nature, and we need to get our heads right about that. And that goes for plastics, it goes for industrialized agriculture, it goes for aquaculture, fish farming. So if we do these things, we can have a much better world. This is my wife, and I went and saw the mountain gorillas of Africa. This is one of the greatest experiences of our lives. You get to see, the world is so beautiful. There is so much beautiful things to see. And the only reason we're able to see those gorillas is because we're able to concentrate farming, we're able to protect landscapes. And so there's a lot of things, beautiful things that we have done and still have to achieve. But I think we have to get our heads right about how to do that. Thank you so much, Vicente.